Some hearts break quietly, like a whisper in the wind you almost don't hear. Jenny's heart had cracked a long, long time ago. Not from a single sharp blow, but from the slow, steady pressure of too many days of waiting. Too many nights of praying for a love that never seemed to find her. So, when a letter arrived from a stranger out west, a man with hurting eyes and a ranch full of silence, she did something she never thought she'd do. She folded up her fears. She packed her last bit of hope, and she climbed aboard a train heading for the edge of the world. The letter was short, maybe 10 lines. There were no flowery words, no grand promises, just his name, Luke Walker, and a simple, brutal offer. I have a small ranch in Wind River, Wyoming. I need a wife. I won't promise you love, but I can offer a roof, food, and honest work. If that's enough, come. If that's enough. Jenny read those lines 100 times. She held the piece of paper to her chest and closed her eyes. Outside, rain hit the windows of the little house she shared with her aunt. Inside, the clock on the mantel just ticked. Steady, like the heartbeat of a life that was going nowhere fast. She'd had other offers, men who wanted a pretty face for Sunday service, or a quiet wife who'd never argue. But this letter? It wasn't charming. It wasn't sweet. It was honest. And something about that honesty called to a part of her soul that had been silent for years. Her aunt was not happy. "You don't know him, Jenny," she said, her hands folding shirts into sharp, angry squares. "What if he's cruel? What if he's a drinker? What if he's nothing but a stranger with an empty house and a hard heart?" Jenny looked at the fire crackling in the hearth. "Then I will bring warmth with me," she said softly. That night, she wrote him back. Just one word. Yes. The journey took 7 days. 7 days of watching the world change. Tall buildings and brick roads melted into flat fields. Flat fields rose into rolling hills. And finally, the hills gave way to mountains that stood like quiet, sleeping giants against the sky. Each night, she held her small Bible close, her fingers tracing the same verse over and over, a promise she clung to like a life raft. "For I know the plans I have for you," says the Lord. "Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." She wasn't running away. She was running toward. The morning she arrived in Wind River, the town was still asleep. A thin layer of frost clung to the wooden porch rails like sugar. Her boots made soft thuds on the train platform as she stepped down, her breath catching in her throat. And then she saw him. He was standing near the edge of the platform, hands shoved deep in his pockets, his hat pulled low. He was taller than she'd imagined, broader in the shoulders. His face was quiet, not mean, not warm, just tired, like he hadn't had a full night's sleep in years. She walked toward him slowly. "Mr. Walker?" He nodded once, his eyes taking her in. "Jenny?" "Yes." He looked at her for a long, heavy moment. It wasn't the way a man looks at a woman he finds beautiful. It was the way a man measures something heavy before deciding if he has the strength to lift it. "You didn't have to come," he said, his voice rough. "I know." Without another word, he reached for her trunk and carried it to a worn buckboard wagon. Jenny followed, her heart beating a fast, frantic rhythm. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Something like standing at the edge of a wide, dark river, not knowing if the bridge you're about to step on will hold. The ride to the ranch was silent. The only sound was the clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels. Fields of brown grass stretched out on all sides, dusted with snow on the high peaks in the distance. The land was beautiful, but it was a lonely kind of beautiful, like it had been waiting a long time for someone to bring life back to it. When they arrived, she saw a house with chipped paint, a barn that leaned just a little to one side, and a clothesline dancing in the wind with nothing on it. No flowers, no curtains, just wood and dust and a whole lot of empty sky. Luke helped her down from the wagon. It ain't much, he said, his eyes on the horizon, not on her. Jenny managed a small smile. It's more than I had yesterday. He nodded, but he didn't seem to know what to do with her words. He showed her to a small bedroom. The air smelled of cedar and old paper. A single bed, a dresser, and a window with no covering. A wooden cross hung crooked above the doorway. Take your time settling in, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I'll be out in the barn. She watched him walk away, his shoulders slumped, like he was carrying more than just the weight of his own body. She unpacked her small trunk, placing her Bible on the windowsill where the morning light could find it. Then she knelt by the bed. Lord, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know this man. I don't know this land, but I trust you. If you brought me here, then I believe something good will grow, even from broken ground. Later that evening, they sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. Jenny had made a simple meal of potatoes and bread. Luke barely ate. You don't talk much, she said gently. He shrugged. Words don't fix much. Maybe not, she said, looking down at her plate. But they can plant seeds. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for just a second something in his eyes shifted. The door to that locked room inside him hadn't opened. But maybe, just maybe, it was a little less closed. That night, Jenny stood by the window and watched the moon rise over the leaning barn. She didn't know what the days ahead would bring. But she knew one thing for sure. The soil was dry. The man was hurting. But she was here. And she had brought hope with her. And sometimes, in a place that has forgotten what hope feels like, that's all you need for the story to really begin. The first week was quiet. A deep, heavy quiet, like the hush that settles over the land right before a storm. Jenny woke before the sun, the rhythm of work a comfort to her. She started the fire, kneaded bread, her hands moving by habit. It gave her a sense of purpose in a house that felt like it had lost its own. Luke was always up before her, gone from the house without a word. He moved like a man haunted by ghosts, every step heavy, every glance distant. He wasn't cruel. He was just empty. A house with all the furniture gone. She wanted to ask him what he was running from. But she held her questions tight, like secrets of her own. She learned the ranch by walking it. The fields were still sleeping under a thin blanket of frost. Fences leaned tiredly. The barn smelled of old hay and sorrow. This wasn't a rich man's ranch. It was a wounded one, but it was still alive. And so was Luke. She'd watch him from the kitchen window, mending a fence or shoeing his one old horse. He moved with a quiet strength that hinted at a kindness that might have lived in him once, a long time ago. On Sunday, she went to church alone. The little white chapel was filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the potbelly stove in the corner. After the service, a woman in a blue shawl introduced herself. I'm Clara Davies, she said, her eyes kind. You're Luke's new wife? Jenny just nodded. Folks say he used to have a real fine singing voice, Clara said, her voice soft. Haven't heard it in a long time, though. She touched Jenny's arm. Some men carry their sorrow like a tool on their belt. Don't you take it personal. I don't, Jenny said. I just hope he'll let me help carry it one day. That afternoon, she found Luke in the barn. They said you used to sing, she said gently. His hand stilled on the piece of leather he was mending. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. Long time ago, he finally muttered. She didn't push. I brought pie, she said instead. He looked up then, and something in his face softened. Hope it's not peach. Hate peach. It's apple. He gave a short, sharp nod. Then you can stay. It wasn't a joke, it was a test, and somehow she'd passed. The house began to wake up. Jenny hung curtains. The smell of stew filled the rooms. Luke started leaving a pile of fresh firewood by the door each morning. He never mentioned it. She never thanked him. It was a silent conversation. One morning she found him brushing the old horse. "She's a beautiful animal," Jenny said. He didn't look at her. "Her name was Larkspur. My fiancé named her." The words came out rough, like he was pulling them up from a deep, dry well. "What happened?" Jenny asked, her voice a whisper. "She died," he said flatly. "2 winters ago. Barn caught fire." He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were hollowed out with a pain so raw it was terrifying. "I was away, fixing a neighbor's roof. By the time I got back..." He couldn't finish. "I should have been here," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I could have saved her." "You don't know that, Luke." "I do," he said, turning away, his shoulders shaking. "I count the minutes I was gone. Every single night." Jenny reached out and touched his sleeve. "Grief isn't the same as guilt, Luke. It's just love that doesn't have a place to go anymore." He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away. That night, a real storm blew in, the wind howling like a wounded animal. Luke burst into the house, his hair soaked, his face grim. "A calf is missing," he said, grabbing a lantern. "I have to find it." "I'll come with you," Jenny said, already reaching for her shawl. "No, it's too cold." "I can handle cold, Luke. I'm not made of glass." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. They searched the hills in the driving rain, their lantern a single flickering star in the darkness. They found the calf huddled against a rock, half frozen and trembling. They carried it to an old line shack, a tiny one-room shelter against the storm. Inside, with the wind groaning outside, Luke wrapped the calf in his own coat. Jenny knelt beside it, rubbing its tiny legs, trying to bring life back into them. And in that small, broken place, something else was being mended. "I was scared," Luke said suddenly, his voice low. "After she died, I was scared of ever trying again, of ever feeling again." Jenny looked up, her face lit by the golden glow of the lantern. "Love isn't what breaks us, Luke," she said softly. "It's what holds us together when everything else is falling apart." He met her eyes then, and this time, he didn't look away. The silence that fell between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of 1,000 things that didn't need to be said. But what Jenny didn't know was that the fire that took Luke's fiancé, it wasn't an accident. And the secret of that night was buried deeper and darker than any grief. And it was about to be dug up. The first sprouts in Jenny's garden pushed through the hard, dry soil like tiny green prayers. She'd planted carrots and beans, but in the center, she'd planted a small packet of flower seeds Luke had given her. "These were hers," he'd said, his voice rough. "Larkspurs. She never got around to planting them." Now, watching them grow, Jenny felt a strange connection to the woman she'd never met. The ghost that lived in the quiet corners of her new home. The quiet between her and Luke was changing too. It was less like an empty room and more like a held breath. He started fixing things around the house. He built a swing for the porch. They sat on it in the evenings watching the sunset, their shoulders sometimes brushing. But the ghosts weren't gone. They were just waiting. One morning, a stranger rode into town. He was well dressed with a hard, clean-shaven face and eyes that missed nothing. He started asking questions about the fire at the Walker Ranch 2 years ago. Clara Davies from the feed store came out to the ranch that afternoon, her face tight with worry. "His name is Marshall Thorne," she told Jenny in a hushed voice. "He's a Pinkerton detective. He says he's investigating for an insurance company." Jenny's blood went cold. "An insurance company? After 2 years?" "That's what he says," Clara whispered, her eyes darting toward the barn where Luke was working. "But Jenny, he's asking about Larkspur. about who she was seeing before she died. The words hit Jenny like a physical blow. Before she could ask more, Luke came walking up from the barn. Clara fell silent, gave Jenny a quick, worried look, and hurried back to her wagon. "What did she want?" Luke asked, his eyes on the retreating wagon. "Just inviting us to a church social," Jenny lied, her heart hammering. That night she couldn't sleep. The house felt different. The quiet was heavy again. She crept out of her room and saw a light under the door of the small study Luke never used. She pushed the door open a crack. Luke was sitting at a small desk, his back to her. Spread out in front of him wasn't ranch paperwork. It was a map. A map of the Western Territories, with lines and notes drawn all over it. And on the desk, next to the map, was a pile of money. More money than she had ever seen in her life. And a gun. He wasn't a grieving rancher. He was planning to run. But from what? Or who? The next day she rode into town alone. She found the Pinkerton Thorne in the saloon, nursing a whiskey. "You're the new wife," he said, his voice flat. It wasn't a question. "I want to know why you're here," Jenny said, her hands clenched at her sides. Thorne took a slow sip. "Your husband's fiancée, Larkspur, wasn't just a simple ranch girl. Her father was a wealthy banker back east. When she died, she had a life insurance policy, a very large one. The payout was to go to her father." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "But the claim was never paid, because the official report on the fire was inconclusive. The local sheriff ruled it an accident, but he was a drunk and he retired a month later. The file was a mess." "So you're here to prove it was an accident?" Jenny asked, a sliver of hope in her voice. Thorne gave her a cold smile. "No, ma'am. I'm here to prove it was murder." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "And right now, your husband is my only suspect." Jenny felt the floor drop out from under her. Luke would never. He loved her. "Did he?" Thorne said, raising an eyebrow. "Or did he love the idea of her father's money? A fire can hide a lot of things, Mrs. Walker. It can also be a perfect way to get rid of a fiancé who is maybe getting ready to leave you for someone else." The air rushed out of Jenny's lungs. That's what Clara had hinted at, that Larkspur had been seeing someone else. She stumbled out of the saloon, her mind reeling. The man she had been slowly, carefully falling in love with. Was he a killer? The grief she had worked so hard to heal? Was it all a lie? She had to know the truth. That night, after Luke was asleep, she crept into the study. The map was gone. The money was gone. But he had forgotten one thing. Tucked under a loose floorboard, she found a small, locked metal box. Her hands shaking, she carried it back to her room. She used a hairpin, a trick her brother had taught her as a child, and after a few tense moments, the lock clicked open. Inside, there weren't letters. There wasn't a confession. There was a wedding ring, a man's wedding ring, heavy, gold, and engraved on the inside. She held it up to the moonlight streaming through her window. The inscription was faint, but she could make it out. "To my dearest L, forever yours, C." L for Larkspur, but who was C? And then she saw what else was in the box, a folded piece of paper, a deed, the deed to a silver mine in Colorado, co-signed by two people, Larkspur Davies, and a man named Charles Davies, Clara's husband. Luke wasn't just grieving a lost love. He had been betrayed. And the woman who had been so kind to Jenny, the woman who had warned her about Luke's sorrow, her husband was at the center of it all. But the final twist, the one that made her gasp and drop the ring, was the date on the deed. It was dated the day after the fire. Larkspur and Charles hadn't just been having an affair. They had been partners. And on the night of the fire, they were supposed to run away together after they got what they came for. But what did they want from Luke? And what really happened in that barn? She had a terrible feeling that the fire wasn't meant for Larkspur at all. It was meant for Luke. The truth came out in pieces, sharp and painful as broken glass. The next morning, Jenny confronted Clara, not with anger, but with a quiet, desperate need to understand. She showed her the ring. Clara collapsed at her kitchen table, her face crumbling. "I knew," she sobbed. "I always knew Charles was involved. He was a good man once, but the silver fever, it poisoned him." The story was uglier than Jenny could have imagined. Larkspur wasn't sunlight. She was a storm. She'd come to Wind River with a plan. She'd charmed Luke, promised him marriage, all to get her hands on the one thing his family had left him, the land. But not for ranching. Beneath Luke's ranch, deep in the earth, was a rich vein of silver, a secret only Luke's father had known. Charles Davies, the feed store owner, had been Larkspur's partner from the start. They were going to get the deed from Luke, then get rid of him. "She met him in the barn that night," Clara whispered, her eyes wide with old terror. "She was supposed to get him to sign the papers. But Luke, he'd gone to help the neighbors. He wasn't there." Larkspur and Charles argued. He was tired of waiting. She was reckless. In the struggle, a lantern was knocked over. The old dry hay went up like a torch. "Charles ran," Clara said, her voice barely audible. "He just left her there. He came home smelling of smoke, his hands burned. He told me she tripped, that it was an accident. He had let the whole town, and Luke, believe a lie for 2 years. He let Luke drown in a sea of guilt that belonged to him. And the Pinkerton detective? He wasn't working for an insurance company. Larkspur's father had hired him, not to find a killer, but to find the silver. The insurance policy was a lie to get the town talking, to put pressure on Luke, to force his hand. That night, Jenny told Luke everything. She laid the ring and the deed on the table between them. She watched as 2 years of self-blame and grief were ripped away, replaced by a cold, quiet fury. He didn't explode. He didn't shout. He just stood up, strapped on his gun belt, and started walking toward the door. "Luke, no," Jenny pleaded, grabbing his arm. "Don't do this. Don't become the man they think you are." "He let me believe I was responsible," Luke said, his voice dangerously soft. "He watched me die inside, day after day. He let me carry his sin. That's not something a man can walk away from." "Then let the law handle it. Thorne is a detective." "Thorne doesn't care about justice," Luke shot back. "He cares about a paycheck. This is between me and Davies." He walked out into the night. Jenny sank into a chair, her heart breaking all over again. She had finally healed him, only to watch him walk toward a different kind of death. But Jenny wasn't the same woman who had stepped off the train months ago. She ran to the study, to the loose floorboard where she'd found the box. The map was gone. The money was gone. He was running. But not from the law. He was running toward a final, bloody reckoning. She knew she couldn't stop him, but maybe she could stop what was coming. She rode Larkspur, the old horse, hard into town. She didn't go to the sheriff. She went to the one place where truth mattered more than law, the church. She found the preacher and a half-dozen of the town's elders there, talking in hushed tones about the trouble brewing. She told them everything, about the lies, the betrayal, the silver, about a good man pushed to his breaking point. Meanwhile, Luke walked into the feed store. It was late, but a light was still on. Charles Davies was there, with Thorne, the Pinkerton. They were celebrating, a bottle of whiskey on the counter between them. They'd made a deal. Thorne would get a cut of the silver in exchange for framing Luke. "It's over, Walker," Thorne said, his hand on his gun. "Give it up." "I'm not here for you," Luke said, his eyes locked on Davies. "I'm here for him." Davies, his face pale with sweat, scrambled for the shotgun he kept under the counter. But before anyone could fire a shot, the door to the feed store opened. It was Jenny, and behind her stood the preacher, the blacksmith, and every decent man in Wind River. They were unarmed. but they stood together, a silent wall of judgment. "It's over, Charles," the preacher said, his voice ringing with authority. "Clara has confessed everything. The whole town knows what you did." Davies looked from the faces in the doorway to Luke's cold, steady gaze. There was nowhere left to run. Thorne, seeing his payday disappear, made a move. He drew his pistol, but he wasn't aiming at Luke. He was aiming at Jenny. He never got the shot off. Luke's draw was a blur of motion. The peacemaker roared, and Thorne crumpled to the floor. In the ringing silence, Charles Davies dropped the shotgun and fell to his knees, sobbing. Justice had finally come to Wind River, not with a badge, but with the courage of a woman who refused to let another heart break. The last frost passed, and the ranch bloomed. The larkspurs Jenny had planted came up, tall and violet and proud. Luke built the porch swing, and they sat on it in the evenings, watching the stars come out. The silver mine turned out to be real, but Luke wanted no part of it. He signed the deed over to the town, to be used to build a new school and a proper hospital. He and Jenny were married again. Not because the first vows didn't count, but because the second ones were spoken from a place of love, not duty. The whole town came. Clara Davies, now a widow, stood with Jenny, her face filled with a sad, grateful peace. Years passed. The porch swing never stopped swaying. The sound of children's laughter filled the house that had once been so quiet. Luke's hair turned to silver. Jenny's stayed the color of warm honey. They grew old together, their hands wrinkled but still intertwined. Sometimes a stranger would ride through and ask about the prosperous little town, and someone would point to the ranch on the hill. And they would tell the story of the quiet man with the broken heart, and the mail-order bride who traveled 1,000 miles to teach him how to live again. They would say she brought more than just hope to Wind River. She brought grace. What did you think of Jenny and Luke's story? Do you believe one person's courage can heal a whole town? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of a love that was stronger than greed and grief touched your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because we have so many more stories to share.